What can man turn to? Run.
My brother was, in many ways, an overachiever.
Best friend. Whiskey is man's second best friend.
September 28th will mark 15 years since my brother committed suicide.
As long as now we're drinking.
My brother died by suicide.
A drinking since rum was rum papa.
Hello and welcome to MASS, which is the Mental Awareness Show, being brought to you by Friends of the Mentally Ill and sponsored by National Lotteries Authority. I am Sarana Mitchell, and we're talking about suicide and suicide prevention. With me are Mr. Hensley Duncan and Dr. Trevor Stephen. Welcome to MASS, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Sarana, and welcome to all the listeners. And hello to Dr. Stephen.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Awesome. So before we get into the meat of the discussion, that is to speak with Mr. Duncan, could you just give me a definition for suicide, Dr. Stephen?
Well, there are a couple of definitions for suicide. The one that comes to mind is when someone takes their own life. We say complete an action that causes the end result is death.
Okay. Now we're talking about suicide and suicide prevention. The reason being, Tuesday, September 10th is World Suicide Prevention Day. And the theme is all about changing the narrative, starting the conversation. So to start that conversation, we're going to talk with Mr. Duncan. Mr. Duncan, hello and welcome.
Thank you, Sarana.
So we are here talking about suicide, and it's not under the best of, circumstances, because a family member of yours died by suicide. And could you share with me which family member? Is it a sibling? Could you share?
Yeah, it was a sibling, was my elder brother. He was this September 28th will mark 15 years since my brother committed suicide.
Okay. Wow. Wow. And, not chiding or anything, but the terminology committed suicide, there is a desire to move away from that use of that, because when you say committed suicide, it turns it into a crime, because in many countries it is still seen as a crime. Yet it is a cry, before leading up to it is a cry for help, So what is happening in many spheres is that they are trying to decriminalize it. So there is a push to use terminologies like died by suicide, but I understand, because it is so much a part of our lingo to speak of it, committed suicide, because that's what we hear and have heard since, we were kids, So you said 15 years, September 20.
When I use the word,
Go ahead, sorry.
When I use the word committed, I didn't, the intention is not like any form of criminalization or any, in that sort of definition. But I understand what you're saying in terms of looking to change the narrative in terms of the terminologies that is used. So I will say that, my brother died by suicide.
Yes. So you said September 28th. How old was he?
He was 48. He was 48 years old at the time. He was married and with two young kids. So he was six of seven kids.
Are you the last? Are you the last?
I am the last.
So which means you guys were close.
Very, very close. It was, we were extremely close. And my brother was, in many ways, an overachiever. He had like 2 master's degree. He graduated from the University of Camagüey with a master's in economic and planning, and also an MBA from George Washington University in the United States, an MBA. He lectured in small business entrepreneurship at St. George's University at the time of his passing. He was a foundation member of Heritage Day.
In fact, Asquith is Grenada national dish. I doesn't even want to know if I'm hungry. So what's wrong with the world? People too sober and worrisome. Worrisome by their sins and malpractices. But rum is the best medicine for any kind of worries. If your wife leave you, drink her. If you leave your wife, drink her. And if you want to leave your wife, drink her.
So he brought a lot of joy to many Grenadians, and Heritage Theatre is still doing its thing. He was the founding member of Amigos de Cuba, which is an organization that, after the revolution, when the students came back to Grenada, they were in many ways ostracized. The government at the time, there was no employment for the initial batch of students who came back. Actually, the government of the day encouraged the students who were studying in Cuba at the time to return home. Some did, promising, without any great emphasis that they were going to be given scholarships, but some came back. My brother was one who stayed among most students. And when he came back to Grenada, as I said, in GBSS and IFE, he was, very articulate. He carried himself very well. He was a good friend of, the Governor General at the time, Sir Paul School. And he was not the first, he was in the second batch of graduates that came back to Grenada.
Okay, so what's his name? We're talking about him.
His name is Asquith. His name is Asquith Duncan.
Okay.
And at the time of his passing, he was a product development officer for the Grenada Board of Tourism.
Okay.
So in many ways, it was with his passing, it was pretty high profile. Everybody, in Grenada, eyes are wide open as to many questions being asked as to reasons why, etc., etc.
Were you in Grenada when he passed?
No, unfortunately, I was in Canada at the time. I was actually the day I was flying, but I didn't find out that day. I found out the following one.
So, when you found out, how did you feel? What emotions came from you?
I was frozen, but not shocked.
You said not shocked. Why?
No. Right. So, Asquith was diagnosed with they call clinical depression in the first year of university. One of his closest friends, actually, Ken Martin Whiteman, was the one who basically was there with him throughout. Ken was studying economics also at the time, and Ken was there with him throughout. So gave him all the necessary support and stuff like that during the first year. And we learned about it after. The family didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And through the years from the time that first year of university to the time that he died by suicide, that would have been his fifth episode. So there were like 4 major episodes before that. And I, through my work, sort of got resources that was able to to speak and deal with someone who was dealing with depression. Seeing that this was my closest brother, my brother, and I needed to know how to speak, just be able to give them support. So these were resources that my company provided. I did many courses, and in terms of dealing with him. And one of the biggest things that they were saying is that being able to, they said, with depression, it's easy for you to become depressed by the person who is suffering. And one of the issues is that being able to, as I said, in order to not be able to put a monkey on your back.
Mm.
And that's one of the things that we did, how to speak to him. And suicide is a topic that I raised with my brother over the years.
Mm.
The issue, the biggest issue with this is that when you are having this discussion, you are speaking to someone who is not depressed. And for people who do not understand that depression is that I saw my brother was in 2 modes. There was one mode where there is not a possible problem in this world that cannot be solved. He's very outgoing. He's funny. It's just a joy to be around. He has a dry sense of humor, also other sense of humor. But then I've seen my brother in a depressed state where he is in a fetal position and he only sees darkness. That, regardless of the conversation that you have with him, you say, hey, it's a beautiful day. And he will be able to see that one cloud to tell you that it's going to rain. So someone who is difficult for people who on the streets who's not around to really understand what it is for someone who is deeply depressed.
No, you said it was his 5th episode. Are you talking about 5th depression episode or 5th attempt at suicide?
No, 5th depressive episode.
Okay.
We're talking about deep depression. So that, as I said, I had the conversation with him because having done the different courses and trying to understand a bit of depression, trying to deal with it, is a conversation I'll have with him. And then he would look like me as if, are you crazy? You know, when you bring up the word suicide, like, what? You know, it's foreign. So it's foreign to someone who is not depressed. So he's in that state. When he's not depressed, he's outgoing, and you have to, that's when I could have the conversation with him. You're not going to having the conversation when he's, you know, in the depressed mode. It's
A totally different.
totally different. Yeah, it's a different person. It's a different person. Depressed when he's depressed and when he's not depressed.
You did he exhibit any suicidal ideation like prior to, if any family
No.
member would know, like his wife or anybody?
Right. So what was significant with my brother is one of the things that I learned during that time, and I think like all family members were sort of made aware of. I said, when someone is looking to commit suicide, some of the symptoms that they find, they get very organized. They start putting things together, start cleaning up the place, start, you know, just in their mind, they are putting things in order for the family. And it was the complete opposite with my brother.
Hmm.
So I guess in many ways, he was, you know, didn't care, you know, things that way he was so articulate about and concerned about. He was very meticulous. All of that was done. He was very sloppy. His check, you know, was from work, was just sitting there. It wasn't deposited. You know, there were many things that where it shows he was disorganized. So you will think that, no, those are not the so-called symptoms that will lead to suicide. You know, I spoke to him a couple of days before. I was in St. Lucia, and my intention was to fly back to Grenada, but then I ended up having to go back. So I didn't get a chance to pass through to Grenada at the time. And we were speaking almost all the days, and there wasn't anything that we could suspect that that's what that he will, you know, eventually end up dying by suicide. And I always thought, when it come, he was so family oriented. Like his children was his life. I could tell you, he could be in whatever meeting, or if he had to go and pick up his kids or do something for his children, that was secondary. And I always thought that if he gets to that point where he thinks it's, you know, it's not worth it, not, you know, that he will see the face of his children, and that will pull him back. And it didn't. And it just goes to show you that if the power of mental illness, you know, it stunned Grenada, it stunned the family. I mean, you know, with a small society, when I came home, you know, people, they're not sure how to approach you at the time, because, you know, and even relatives, you know, are unable to understand it. They'll be like, they'll meet me and they don't know, you know, they do not know how to start a conversation. They will be like, oh, Asquith could do this to us, you know, as people, you know, many taking it personal, you know, almost like personal, as if it was, you know, it was an intentional something that he did to hurt the family, not understanding that he lived with mental illness for a very long time. Also, meeting Grenadians and speaking to them, and because I was very open. And this is one of the things that we the family, we decided to do, and this was, I mean, compliments of the people he was very close to. So Ken Martin Whiteman, Richard Duncan, Ruggers Ferguson, Terence Smith, they were his close mates. And they, when in terms of dealing with the funeral and stuff like that, they said, listen, we have to, Asquith is not a shy person. He was never a shy person. This is something that we need to bring out as a dialogue and to bring it as an illness. And when I spoke at my brother's funeral, I spoke about, I said, you know, telling Grenadians that we all knew him as this person, you know, very funny, very articulate and smart. But those of us closest to him know that for over 20-something years, that he suffered with mental illness. And when you have an illness, you do not necessarily walk around, you know, announcing it to the world, you know. So the average knows and interacts with him will just see that professional, you know, side or funny side of it. So I think when the first, I think one of the first people realized that there was mental illness involved is with regards to his death announcement. We said, when the family, we said no flowers, but a donation to be made to the friends of the mentally ill. And this was, I think, this was the first indication that we had realized that he did have, you know, he was associated with having mental illness.
So you honored your brother's passing with asking to make donations to friends of the mentally ill. That was just awesome. How do you continue to honor him?
Right.
How do you remember him?
That's pretty easy, because the family and his friends, we know how we live. We knew how we live. We did not focus. We don't focus on how we die. So, and his contribution for 48 years, as I said, forming up the friends, Amigos de Cuba. And coming back to that, the reason why Amigos de Cuba was formed is that when Asquith returned to Grenada, he was immediately hired to set up the technical assistance desk for the Organization of American States. So the OS in the Ministry of Finance. At the time, as I said, you know, Sir Paul Schoon was who I liked my brother a lot, because he, unlike me, who, you know, there was no prices for decorum or any of those things. I wouldn't receive those. You know, actually, I mentioned in Sir Paul's book, actually, I think it's page 148, that is talking about during the revolution that prior to giving a GBSS boy a prize, he had to fix his tie. And I remember that occasion very much, because it was me. But it will never happen with my brother, you know, to be noted that I've been in the book of Sir Paul's School before. Right? But on a serious note, so Asquith was hired, and this was due to, I guess, his connection with Sir Paul School. Now, when Asquith was hired in the Ministry of Finance, he couldn't understand that his words were that this is crazy, that he was the only one. So we look back now, the Minister of Finance. No, he was also studied with my brother. He was a graduate at the time. He was not. They came back together. They weren't employed. So my brother was, in terms of Amigos de Cuba, was for two reasons. First, to sort of lobby the government to hire the students who returned from University of Cuba. And secondly, well, you know, to show fellowship, you know, appreciation for the work that Cuba gave to Grenada at the time. So, and he was the president of the association until he passed. So, in many ways, so this is quite significant, and also, you know, his association with Christy Riggs and the Heritage Theatre. So, you know, you go back to, there's many places, you know, you see him acting, you know, it's funny. He's, you know, very, very outgoing. He was funny, he was hilarious. But then there was the other side of him also. So, as I said, for the family, for us, he was extremely loving. For in regards to my parents and stuff, the siblings, you know, 4 sisters and my other brother, he was there for everyone. And when Asquith was in Grenada, I never ever one day worried about my parents, you know, who were getting elderly, because he took care of everything, you know. If there's something needed for assistance or what, it's a phone call, but he took care of it, and it was such a void. It was such a void. You know, you take things for granted, and with his passing, then you realize that, you know, how much was he did, you know, during that time. So, as I said, we focus on how we live, not how we die.
We continue the discussion on MASS, the Mental Awareness Show. MASS is being brought to you by the National Lotteries Authority.